Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest ExoLife Hangout. My name is Tony Darnell. As I hope you know by now, I work at deepastronomy.space, and this is the Hangout where, if you care about life in the universe, then you need to be here, because that's what we talk about each time with my co-hosts and guests, and we usually have a really great conversations, and we hope that you guys will join in on our conversations there's a number of ways, but I'm hoping you'll use our Discord chat service, which is on deepastronomy.space/live. I'm looking at that. I have it right here in front of me, and it'd be a great way to get questions and comments, but I'm also looking at the other live chats as well, and my co-host Kevin is also helping to do that. So let me bring everybody up here. Here's the gang, and I'll start with my regular co-host. Down in the bottom row there on the left side is Dr. Jeff Kuhn. He's a member. These are all members of the Planets Foundation, of which this Hangout is a collaboration between the Planets Foundation and Deep Astronomy to sort of help raise awareness for what the Planets Foundation is doing. So Dr. Jeff Kuhn's on the lower left, and Dr. Svetlana Berdugina is on the lower right. Hi, guys. It's good to see you.
Hi.
Hey. We span the globe with this Hangout because Jeff is in Hawaii, where it is morning time. I'm in the East Coast. Jill, our guest today, is on the West Coast, and Svetlana is in Germany in Europe. So we are covering the globe here with the time zones. So thank you all for being able to make it work. Kevin Lewis is in the upper right. He puts these together. He makes them happen. So welcome, guys. Our guest today is Dr. Jill Tarter from the SETI Institute. It's a name that I'm sure most of you recognize, and she is the subject of a new book that's come out, written by Sarah Scholes, called Making Contact, Jill Tarter and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So welcome, Jill. It's so good to have you on our Hangout.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be with you.
I can't tell you. I met you first for the first time last year in December at the ELF workshop. So it was a real honor for me. It was held at the SETI Institute as well. So, okay. So let's go ahead and start with the book, Jill, if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit about. Most of us who follow your career know that your career was sort of the inspiration for the Jodie Foster character in the movie Contact, which is still in one of my top 5 of all-time favorite sci-fi movies. This book it outlines your career and some of the things that you've done. Tell us how this book got started and what are some of the things that some of the highlights of the book itself.
Well, Sarah Scholes looked me up at an American Astronomical Society meeting and twisted my arm. She said, "I want to write a book about you." And I said, I don't think you'll get a very large audience. Let's do a book about SETI, because I had formally retired and that was on my bucket list and I wasn't getting around to it. And so Sarah did this book, which is a combination story about SETI as a scientific exploration and its history since the 1959 paper by Cacconi and Morrison, and a story about me. And it was kind of hard for Sarah to find a publisher and get this sold, because it's not one genre or another. It's a mix, and I think she's got a great voice. I really do like reading it. There are a couple of tiny faux pas in there that are now fixed because we're getting to do a new edition for paperback.
Okay.
And so it was fun. She just interrupted her life. She was an editor at Astronomy magazine. She quit. She came and lived in California for a couple of years, hung out with me and at the SETI Institute, and wrote what I think is a quite enjoyable story.
Well, for those I put a link in the description of all these videos to my Amazon, to the Deep Astronomy Amazon page. The book is in there. If you click on that, and full disclosure, if you actually purchase it, then Deep Astronomy might get a few pennies because it's an affiliate thing. But that the book is there. I only learned about it Wednesday, so I am waiting to receive my copy so that I can read it. But part of the story that we're going to talk about today, folks, is not just the story of SETI, which of course is long and storied, but also about what Jill's career was like as a woman in astronomy and in science, because this is she's obviously one of the biggest names in the SETI community, and she's built a really good career and has had a lot of good advice to share over the generations, I think, to help women who are looking to get into astronomy themselves as well. So I want to talk about all of that here. But before I do, I want to finish up with the SETI story. So let's start with how you got involved. You got involved in the 70s, I read, where you were reading this NASA report that was entitled Project Cyclops. And it was basically outlining how we could use Earth-based radio telescopes to find life in the universe.
Yeah, I was a graduate student at Berkeley at the time, and Stu Boyer, an X-ray astronomer, got together with Jack Welch, who was a radio astronomer and director of the UC Berkeley Radio Astronomy Observatory. And Stu had been attending lectures that NASA Ames had been holding. He had a really clever idea. He knew how radio telescope worked, and that it was possible to take the voltages that the telescope was collecting as a function of time and make a copy of them almost noiselessly, so that you could do something else with the same data that the radio astronomers were collecting. Now, if you try that with an optical telescope, somebody's going to cut off your hand because you can't share photons that way. But in a radio telescope, you measure both the amplitude and the phase of a signal. And so, indeed, you can make multiple copies of the signal being collected and do different things with them. And Stu realized that we could analyze the output of the Hat Creek 85-foot telescope in a way that would allow us to look for engineered signals rather than astrophysical signals. But he didn't have any money to do this, just a good idea. So he went around the department, and one of the astronomers gave him this old PDP-8/S computer.
Oh my God. Yes. I actually know what that is.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure most of your viewers have never experienced this very ancient
front panel switches. Remember those?
I do. And the fact that there was no language, right? You had to write your programs in octal, and it had all of 64K of memory. Yeah. Right? But
horrible times.
Oh, well, or good times. We're getting started, right? So Stu said, well, what do I do with this? And somebody said, Jill worked on that her first year as a graduate student. She's still here. Why don't you go talk to her? And so he came to my office with this Cyclops report, an engineering design study about how you could build a large radio telescope that would potentially allow you to detect signals being broadcast by a distant civilization. And, I read through that report, which had been written by John Billingham and Barney Oliver, sort of in one sitting. And it's a turgid report, but it was so fascinating. And I realized that, I was sitting there at the right time with the right set of tools that I could potentially have the opportunity and the privilege of trying to answer this question that humanity's been asking forever. Are we alone? Now, we didn't have to ask the priests and the philosophers what we should believe. We had some tools. We had some telescopes. We had computers that would potentially allow us to go find the answer, whatever it is. And I said, that's it. Big question. I've got the right skills. I'm hooked.
All right. Well, Condor Boss is asking, have you ever met Jocelyn Bell?
I have. She's fantastic.
Tell us who she is first so other viewers can know.
Jocelyn Bell is an astronomer who, as a PhD graduate student in England, strung miles and miles and miles of wires on fence posts to build a low-frequency antenna, something that had never been done before. And when they started looking at the data, Jocelyn was extraordinarily dedicated, and she found what she called a little bit of scruff in these chart recordings. Okay, so pens writing on paper, rolls that are miles long, right? And you had to stare at those rolls of paper to see when the pen And the recorder started going wild, right, and indicating signal. And so Jocelyn looked at all of this output, and she said there was a little bit of scruff. She followed up on it. She realized that it came again the next day, but 4 minutes different in time, which is a key to the fact that it's actually a celestial source. And this was the discovery of the first pulsars, rotating neutron stars whose magnetic axis and rotational axis are not aligned. And so as it rotates, it has this radio beam that passes by the Earth occasionally, as the way a lighthouse would illuminate a particular part of the beach. And this was fantastic. And Jocelyn was the one who found them. And unfortunately, it was Jocelyn's thesis advisor who won the Nobel Prize for this discovery, and not Jocelyn.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on this topic in a little bit.
Well-known story, yes, in astronomy.
Right. And
she's very gracious about it, more than I think I would be.
Yeah, it's a story that I think is all too common in a lot of these situations, and I want to get right back to that in a minute. But I want to get to getting back to what your comment on SETI, that it got started with this idea that you could actually split a radio signal without losing any quality, unlike what you can with photons. And I just want to make sure I'm visioning what you're saying properly. When you want to split a beam in optical wavelengths, you end up putting in some kind of beam splitter, and you do end up splitting up the photons. Is it the same kind of thing? Is that what you're talking about, where you get degradation but not in the radio wavelength? You can split it up in any kind of way and not have signal loss, and that's what makes radio searches for this possible?
You can split the voltage versus time signal that you're getting from the astronomy.
Okay.
The radio astronomy telescope.
Okay.
Any number of ways, and amplify it back so that you have a useful signal, and you add a little bit of noise, but not a whole lot.
Okay. And so the history of SETI then starts with these beginnings, with this radio, using ground-based radio telescopes. Where does it go from there? What does SETI and I guess when I mean SETI, I mean this organization, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, I guess. Was it initially, from these beginnings where you got involved, was it a NASA funded thing, or was it some other kind of government program, or was it privately funded? Where did it go? How did it start that way?
Well, there are two things. There's SETI, which is a scientific discipline. It's an exploratory science.
Okay, all right.
And then there's the SETI Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that I co-founded in 1984.
Okay.
And we actually did this to save NASA money. Very strange. Most people don't do that. But after the SETI project at Hat Creek, which we called Serendip, after that got started, I went to NASA Ames as a postdoc to figure out how to detect brown dwarfs, little stars that don't have enough mass to stably fuse hydrogen to helium.
Right.
They burn a little deuterium, and then eventually they go out. And we were trying, at the time, there was something called the Shuttle Infrared Facility, CERTIF, and that eventually got turned into a free-flying spacecraft. We were trying to figure out how we could find these brown dwarfs. Could they, in fact, be the missing mass that we called at the time? We now call it dark matter. And while I was at NASA Ames, I met John Billingham, who was starting a series of projects and programs to consider this idea of life beyond Earth. We called it exobiology at the time. And I said, look, John, there's more than 40 hours in a week, and I'm happy to volunteer with your program. What can we do? And so John Billingham led that effort for a number of years. It was NASA funded. It was funded out of the Life Sciences Division of NASA. And in 1984, we had the following situation. We had a number of folks who were working at NASA Ames Now, they were what we call soft money faculty from local universities.
This is where you have to keep applying for grants to keep your job. Yeah,
right. You're not a tenured faculty member,
right.
So you bring in your own salary. And they were all writing grant proposals that allowed them to work on the SETI project. But at the time, there was it was a really bad situation. At the time, each university was able to put an indirect cost, an overhead charge, onto any grants that got written by their faculty. And back there in the early 80s, that overhead was 100% or more sometimes.
Wow.
I mean,
God.
It was actually Stanford University got into a lot of trouble back then because they were actually maintaining a yacht to entertain donors with in part from these indirect charges. So a university does need to collect funds to administer grants that its faculty are doing, and they have to provide a lot of infrastructure, and they should be completely and fairly compensated for that. But it was just out of control back then.
Yeah.
So,
fairly is a key word there.
Tom Pearson, who was actually the boyfriend of the administrative assistant who worked with John Billingham, he was a foundation. He worked in a foundation at San Francisco State. He was a businessman. He put together a number of business models that we considered in order to find ways of spreading the money that NASA was able to provide around better. And this idea of forming a nonprofit and everybody becoming the employee of the nonprofit, and then writing a single grant proposal to do the work that we had been doing, and being able to put on that grant an overhead rate that actually reflected our low cost of doing business because we were at NASA Ames and they were paying to keep the lights on and giving us computer time and all that. So we did that. We formed this nonprofit in 1984. I was employee number one. We wrote a charter that said we were interested in being the scientific home or host for researchers who were interested in any of the vast suite of questions having to do with life beyond Earth. We put a 20% overhead on that grant, sent it off to NASA, and lo and behold, we could get the funds that NASA had available for this research, and we got the differential between 100% and 20% of indirect charges to hire more people, build equipment, do a better job at actually searching. And so that's how the SETI Institute got started. And today, it's grown far beyond anything that I had anticipated. And most of our scientists are card-carrying astrobiologists who write grants to do research to understand origin, evolution, distribution of life in the universe. And they're 75 of them are housed with a tiny SETI team at the SETI Institute in Mountain View. And
well, it's not just that, is it? I mean, Jill, when I was there, I met people studying meteors and other areas, near Earth objects, things like that, who were also at the institute. So there's a lot of really talented people working there now. So
right. I mean, we're talking about life and the coevolution of life with our planet and our surrounding neighborhood.
Right, and so it's great that it's all sort of housed right there. But I wanted to ask Jeff and Svetlana, now do you see any parallels with what the Planets Foundation is doing with ELF and the ExoLife Finder telescope and your other plans for larger telescopes down the road, with kind of what's going with SETI's path? I mean, they are funded, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, by and large from the public or by private funding. Are you guys following a similar path, do you think, or is there differences there?
Well,
We
absolutely.
wish we could.
We have so much to learn, I would say. Yes, and
well, you're just getting started, right? I mean, SETI's been around since the 80s, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we
are very happy to have Jill now together with us and helping us to to actually progress and give us advice.
Okay.
Yeah, I think SETI is much larger and much more. I mean, Jill, you have a critical mass now, right? Of scientists that are writing. There are enough places to find funding that you have a pretty steady stream of overhead coming in from that, don't you?
That's true for the astrobiologists. Yes, they bring in 85% of the annual funding. SETI itself, which for a while, Tony, was a NASA-funded opportunity until 1993 when Senator Bryan terminated the funds for SETI. I mean,
right? Yeah, I get. Yeah, I know that.
that.
That's not the same path that Planets Foundation would have followed. I suppose you did sort of get the kickstart from. I don't want to call it a kickstart. Support from NASA for many years.
We did, and now since '93, it's been privately funded, and most of the SETI around the world is being done on the basis of philanthropy.
Well,
so,
can
we
I ask?
have a small team of SETI professionals, SETI researchers at the Institute, far more astrobiologists. Yeah.
So can I ask? Do you think that the success model for SETI over the years has been dependent on the? I mean, you had a flagship system. You had the ATA, right? Which
the Allen Telescope Array.
Yeah, which attracted attention, attracted funding, and was in many ways, I think, the place that you all circled around and rallied toward. Was it, or was it? You think not such a big element in the growth of SETI, separate from astrobiology?
Well, yeah, the fact that the public can really empathize with what we're trying to do and has a great deal of interest in it. And the fact that in 1993, when this termination happened, we had, through Barney Oliver, really good connections to the first generation Silicon Valley billionaires. So we could go and talk to them, and there was this double whammy that we benefited from. Barney Oliver's connections, people who owed him favors, and these folks saying, God damn, Republicans, what have they done now, right? With respect to the termination. So there was this thing that played out to our benefit, which is, well, we got to fix what Congress just broke. And we had phenomenal success talking to these individuals. And since then, it's been harder to attract the kind of sustaining funding we need each year to keep the team together. We were able, because we had a really good idea about how to build a telescope in an entirely new way that could do SETI and radio astronomy at the same time. This is the Allen Telescope Array. So we were able to attract Mr. Allen, Paul Allen's attention and funding. Unfortunately, he didn't give us enough funds to build it out as big as we would want, and it took us more time and it was more expensive. But at least we were able to demonstrate that building a large radio telescope out of a large number of small dishes really had a lot going for it, economically and in terms of the technology and the science you could do with it. So indeed, the Square Kilometer Array today, an international project, I think owes its heritage to what we were able to demonstrate with the Allen Telescope Array. And we've got 42 dishes. We'd like to have 350, but it's a fantastic instrument to use every day.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
No. That's.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I want to dive into this just a little bit more about this, the Paul Allen support, and then I want to get to some questions that I'm seeing, and then I want to go to the topic of women in science. But this idea, and this is a question for all of you, Svetlana and Jeff as well. I got the feeling when I was at the ELF workshop, and of course with the SETI experience of having the Paul Allen support, is the future of these kinds of endeavors dependent on billionaire philanthropists getting involved? I mean, I don't know what you think, Gerald. I mean, would the ATA have been possible without Paul Allen? And will the ELF be possible without a similar sort of engagement by some very rich person? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes and no. You can hope that there is a rich individual who really
that would be the easiest, wouldn't it, Svetlana? If you could
this question, yes, and wants to leave his name or her name in the history by discovering or donating on this greatest discovery of the history of the humanity, I would say. On the other hand, I believe the government also of not necessarily the United States or of other countries would be also interested to achieve that. I don't know what we're missing to encourage the individuals or governments to really pursue that goal. It seems like there's, of course, there are problems which we have to solve on Earth, and they're global problems, but this problem concerns the entire humanity, and I think it's an important problem to solve.
So ELF is an astrobiology or a SETI telescope, and the problem that Jill should answer this, but I think the problem that we face is that there's a very large community of astronomers that have a broad range of problems that require a very general telescope that does galaxies and it does young clusters, and it does all kinds of pure astronomical research. And here we have a group, in the case of the ATA or in the case of ELF, that advocates this unusual looking instrument that doesn't necessarily focus on all of the other astrophysics. It has astrophysical importance, but it's really aimed at one particular very, very important problem or class of problems. And unfortunately, I think astronomy, from my limited time span doing astronomy, is very democratic, and the total number of people that will vote to spend government funds for something which doesn't necessarily improve their chances of doing their problems makes it really hard. Now, the truth is that every new world's largest telescope that was risky or that had elements that were not like previous telescopes uniformly has been funded by private foundations or individuals. Well, that's not complete. The Russian telescope, right, Svetlana, the 6 meter, was funded.
Yeah, that's a point you've made in the past, which I didn't know prior to having met you.
Well, I'm thinking of the telescope. So the Yerkes telescope was at one point for a short while the largest telescope. Mm-hmm. The Hooker 100-inch telescope was funded by a private individual. The Palomar telescope at 200 inches was entirely private foundation support. The Keck telescope, and so on. So this new model, which would fund the 30-meter telescope or the extremely large European telescope projects, is a little weird because it's government funding. But it's also telescopes that aren't particularly risky because they're really Keck telescopes. They're just scaled versions of Keck. And so from that perspective, to do something which is different, maybe more risky and maybe not applicable to the great community of astronomers and astrophysicists, makes it really hard, and I think really unlikely that for example, ELF would be funded by government funding. I don't know, Jill, could ATA have been funded by not NASA but NSF?
It could have, except that there was such a large amount of new technology that it really did take a visionary. And, astronomy has, as you've pointed out, this really long history of private benefactors building the next big telescope. And I think that you said the TMT was government funded, but in fact, there's a whole lot of...
That's the 30-meter telescope.
Moores. Right. Mr. Moore, Gordon Moore, is responsible in large part for that telescope happening. Yeah. I think that what we should be looking for is a public-private partnership. But if you want to do something new and you want to do it quickly, you're not going to do it with government funding. We're now sitting down writing white papers to prepare for the decadal review, which will take place in a couple of years, that allows the community to prioritize the science they want to do, the instrumentation they want to build over the next decade. And indeed, the history of decadal reviews are that you propose something in one, and it may get started by the time you do the next one. We don't seem to get things done in 10 years. So that's not a good place to be when you're trying to do something specific, technologically risky, and hopefully affordable. So a partnership is a good thing, but I think it's got to start. It's always going to start with a private funding, I think.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask. How to start this partnership? It probably has to start privately, or it should be government, and then private donors can join it. So what's your experience here? What's the most successful operation?
Well, I do think it has to start privately.
Privately.
Really. Yeah, and that it's going to be private funds that pay for the technology development. And I don't know, with respect to ELF, right, Jeff, the comparable situation might be with all of the Epoch of Reionization projects, which have built special purpose telescopes for this just one question: how to study the early universe and the formation of the first stars and galaxies. So it can't do something for everyone, but there are a number of these reionization projects that have gotten started, and they've gotten started with private money, and then they've been picked up in our country in part by the NSF. So it's really hard. I mean, first of all, we're suffering from our past success, right? We have built wonderful instruments in the past, and the next generation of wonderful instruments is going to be more costly, right? It has to be bigger, has to be faster, going to be more expensive. And
well, in my experience with that is also that, you know, there's also a lot of complaining about it when their upfront costs are considered. Hubble's a good example. Hubble was a very expensive telescope, and I don't think anybody would make the case 25, 26 years later that Hubble hasn't done some great work, and everybody loves it now. But when you start out, you don't get always it's the price tag that seems to be the one that everybody talks about. And of course now we got JWST in a similar situation, but give that 25 years, if it goes that long, would also be looked at favorably with the public. So you're right, it is a lot about the success rate of what you've got going forward. Some of the questions are starting to pile up, so I want to get to them before too much time. This is from Tashin on Discord. He's got a question for Dr. Tarter, and this is a little bit related to what we're talking about. Is the work of SETI and the SETI Institute harder today in the current climate of science resistance? And I think it's a great question, because I'm a little bit dismayed at some of the amount of public resistance to scientific ideas, and are you finding that the work harder today, or has it always been about the same?
Well, it is harder in this climate. I mean, it's absurd to me, literally absurd, that we are living in an era where scientists are told to avoid using certain words, right? So the politics dictating scientific outcomes is not a good environment. And so the marches that we've seen in support of scientists and the science they do is, I think, a necessary evil. We just can't allow science to become dictated by either political ideology or religious concerns. I think we need to stand up for science as a way of understanding the world and the universe that we live in, and developing the technologies that will make us able to do other better things in the future, and to actually take care of our planet. I mean, we've been coexisting, co-evolving with this planet for billions of years, and we've now become the dominant force for its future. And it's science that's going to make that better, and it's science that needs to get done on the basis of ground rules for moving forward logically and responsibly, and not on the basis of somebody's own ideological ideas. So, yeah, it's harder. Science is actually under attack, and we all need to defend it.
And that's a whole topic of a hangout in itself, and why that might be. But I agree, it does seem to be a lot harder these days to do this kind of work. From Sephirin, does Dr. Jill think that we may have conclusive evidence of ETs in the next 20 years? Now, instead of holding you down on a specific date, I don't think you'd be doing this, by the way, if you didn't think we'd find evidence. But what do you think? Are you thinking we're going to have conclusive evidence sometime soon?
Let me say I'm optimistic. All right.
I figured you would be.
In 2004, there was a very bold prediction that whereas the 20th century had been the century of physics, the 21st century was going to be the century of biology. And the people that were talking about this were thinking about genomics and proteomics and all of these fantastic outcomes and new data that we're gathering from these technologies and understanding of life and evolution on a molecular level. But I actually don't think that prediction was bold enough. I'm pretty sure that the 21st century is going to be the century of biology on Earth and beyond.
Okay. And you were talking about this before the Hangout started, and you said that in the course of your career, the two big game changers were the discovery of exoplanets, because when you started, there hadn't been any discovered, and the idea of extremophiles. These are these organisms that can live in all kinds of really hostile conditions. Is that what you mean by this being the century of biology and going forward?
Well, yes, I'm pretty confident that there is now a recognition that there is potentially a lot of habitable real estate beyond our planet, either in our solar system, on Mars, or the giant moon Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, the giant moons of Jupiter, or even the little pipsqueak moon Enceladus orbiting Saturn. We know now that there are liquid water oceans under those icy outer carapaces, and we want to go figure out whether any life has evolved there. Because just as in SETI, the number 2 is the really important number. We know of one type of life occupying one planet now, and some of it is intelligent and has a technology. But the moment that you find N of 2, a second example of an independent evolution of life and perhaps intelligence and technology, you know that it will be widespread throughout the cosmos. So number 2 is the really important number, and there's now a lot of interest in this country and in Europe for planning missions that can go explore these regions within our solar system that might allow us to find biomarkers to analyze, to bring back to study, that might indicate evolution of an independent life form somewhere else in the solar system. And I have to say, I mean, I know I live in a bubble because I'm surrounded by people who are as excited about the questions that I am. But when I look at the young population out there of scientists, it seems to me they're really, really excited about astrobiology, about life beyond Earth, and have really good ideas for how we might try and detect it, realizing that it's not an easy job at all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've said this many times on this Hangout. If we can find one other evidence spot of life, a source of life that we can prove did not come from the Earth, that was actually of another origin, then all it takes is one. Then it's everywhere. The thing is finding that one, and we have yet to find that conclusively. But people like Jill are working on it. Time is flying by, and I still haven't really even broached the subject of women in science yet. So I'd like to start that now. And Svetlana, I'm hoping you'll comment on this as well. What's it like, guys? What are the comments on being a woman in science today? I know that's a broad question, but I want to start it with just your general experiences. And Jill, and then Svetlana.
Well, you have to get used to walking into rooms where it's just a bunch of guys. And you have to figure out how you're going to use that to your own advantage. I think that more than ever, women who have succeeded in their fields need to be reaching down to the generations that are coming behind them and helping to support underrepresented groups, mainly women, but lots of other underrepresented groups as well. So we need to be kind to one another, and we need to be really vigilant. I mean, now I get to be part of planning a lot of different things because I'm old and I get asked to do this a lot. And I wasn't always as diligent as I try to be now, making sure that the public-facing part of our science has faces that represent everyone. I mean, there just aren't any excuses anymore for having all male panels on anything. There are great women scientists out there who are experiencing an environment that's a bit more toxic than I thought it had become. It wasn't very nice when I was a graduate student and I was welcomed by the chairman of the department, along with two other women who started when I did, that we were so lucky that all the smart men had been drafted for Vietnam. I mean,
what? They actually said that to you?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. That was pretty awful.
God.
That was pretty bad. And I thought it had gotten much better. But we've seen in the last 2 years that now there's some deep, dark secrets there that we're not acting on. And we've just got to just talk about it, let the sunshine in, deal with it. I thought because young students today, male and female, they're all raised by women of my generation who were, ardent feminists. I thought that we would have taught our sons and daughters to behave better, but apparently there's a lot more work to be done.
Svetlana,
and the best thing is to not be quiet about it.
Agreed. Okay. Svetlana, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can maybe add a little bit. I agree with what Jill says. We have different experiences indeed, and when we have to communicate on committees, when you may be the only woman and you express a different opinion, and you look immediately over kind of who is that talking, and we experience those things. And what I want to say is that it's not just that we want to be fair and represent two parts of humanities. It's kind of should be obvious that we have two parts of the humanity, and why to neglect half of it, as a source of intelligence, and but I also see that it's not only fairness, but it's also advantage to what we do. We are creative in science and all other parts of life, whatever we create in life, we approach things differently. We have different experiences. We have different attitudes, and that kind of diversity enriches. Actually, what I experience is that I attract women to science. Definitely, I have lots of female students and postdocs coming to me, and I encourage women to be bold and go forward with their ideas. And I see that some men get impressed actually to see women being strong and being good leaders and be constructive and very actually productive and active, and because maybe there is some bias also that women, in order to prove themselves in a male-dominated environment, they have to be more active. But that actually leads to very good results, and I think this is what we need to support.
So much.
This is a plus.
I'm trying to find the way to ask this question, but it seems to me that in my 30 plus years of working in science, one of the things that strikes me, and this is regardless of gender, is that the nature of the way science is done as a profession involves a dependency on your superiors in a way that I don't think exists outside of science. For example, if I did not go to graduate school, but had I wanted to go to graduate school, I knew that my success was going to hinge in no small part on the advisor I had in my graduate studies. And I would be utterly dependent on that person to introduce me to colleagues, to get my research out there in front of people who might be, to help. There's this stage where I need help from my superiors to make it as a scientist or as an astronomer. And so this is sort of built into the career path that you take. And on top of that, excuse me, I'm really sorry. And on top of that, there seems to be this. So what that engenders then is a sense of power on the people already established. They have quite a bit of influence over the younger person's career path. And I guess when gender comes into it, this power gets a little bit distorted. Have you guys noticed that in your career? Have your male peers, as you were going up in your career, been given more face time with colleagues than, say, your female, than yourself or other female graduate students and postdocs? Did you experience any of that?
Well, you're very, very right that astronomy is kind of an apprenticeship situation.
Yes.
You're dependent on your advisor, and then you're dependent on whoever you work with in your first postdoc, and eventually you're going to want telescope time, and you're going to want to get a tenured position if you go into academia. And all of these require letters of recommendation for a very long time. You don't outgrow this system until you're well into your 30s, I think. And
right.
So I think we need to find a way so that anyone who suffers from an abuse of power from their supervisors, as they move forward, we can find a way to support them and help them explain why there's a missing letter, why your supervisor didn't write a recommendation for you because you called them out as being whatever bad behavior they might have suggested. We've got to actually figure out a support system that allows that person to go forward and not be burdened for decades by the lack of positive recommendation. Because it wasn't necessarily their fault. It was bad behavior on the part of someone who should have known better. But the powerless individual is the one who's going to suffer for the long term. And so We've got to figure out a support system.
Are women particularly vulnerable then? I guess is part of my question too to this, because of the apprenticeship nature of building your career in astronomy. Are women more vulnerable than men in that regard?
I actually can't answer that because I'm only a member of one minority.
Sure. Yeah, it
right?
might be a stretch.
I think it's more general. It's young people who are vulnerable. At this stage,
men
it's
and
not
women.
just men and women.
Okay.
Yes, I think it's just inexperienced young people. They can suffer from a lack of supervision. And my example, for instance, personal, that I had a lot of, in the beginning of my career, I didn't have real supervision. I was kind of left to myself. And I studied astrophysical journals to see what's going on in science and try to find my own way within those trends. What can I do? What can I add to that? And yes, it slows down you, but then it makes you more independent, maybe. So it depends on the person as well, how much person needs guidance. But I do think that we can accelerate and improve education if we really advise well the young generation. That's for sure.
Is it worse, do you think, in astronomy? Because we hear about it more, certainly, sexual harassment I'm talking, and things like that in the workplace. In astronomy, more than we hear, at least that I've heard about it in other sciences. For example, we all remember the Jeff Marcy scandal. He's the exoplanet scientist or astronomer from Berkeley who was accused of a lot of misconduct over a long period of time. And then after that, it just seemed to start a snowball effect. But it was all in astronomy. In fact, there was even a hashtag on Twitter, AstroSH, about it, where it was all about this, and it just made it seem like astronomy had a real problem. But do you think it's just astronomy? And if so, why?
No, I don't think it's just astronomy at all. And,
okay.
And, talk about hashtag me too.
That's yes, of course,
broader than astronomy. It is just that astronomy, as many scientists are still male dominated, and there are opportunities having to do with observation and remote sites, and there's a lot of opportunity for abuse.
So
it's time. I thought my generation had actually gotten ahead of this problem. I thought we were making the world better for the next generation of women coming up, but it just went underground. And
right.
I think that we don't realize how much internal bias that is.
I think it's a general abuse again. It's also, we have examples that it's a senior women who abuse junior scientists and senior men abuse junior scientists, both sexes, and I think it's a general problem of senior scientists to take responsibilities of proper ethical supervision of, because just to consider those who supervised also being human beings, take them serious, that they are people, adults actually already, whom we supervise.
Well, okay, let's end this with some practical advice. I would like all three of you, and Jeff, you also, to because you're in a position where you can you advise people, you help people start early in their careers. What advice do you give to young women and men getting into science now? Do you have anything that you would like, any words of wisdom, things you've passed on, either in this arena of gender bias or gender issues or not? Just they want to study astronomy, they want to learn about life in the universe. What advice would you give them? Let's start with Jill.
Yeah, build a support network. Really, it's something that never came naturally to me because I was the only woman in 300 undergraduate engineering students. I was never part of a team, but teaming is a big part of the way we do science today. And so I would suggest that young people build their own support team.
Do you mean like among other grad students that you're with, or do you mean family
Yep.
or friends not necessarily related to work? What do you mean?
No, your colleagues.
Okay.
Your colleagues. And be willing to take on their problems as well as being able to share your problems with them. And again, I think the only thing that I can really advise is be loud. Don't be quiet.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, that's good
Don't
advice.
be quiet.
Jeff, what would you say? I mean, surely people have come up to you and they say, "I want to be an astronomer." What advice do you give?
Well, so I think that the biggest piece of advice I give students is don't do this because it's a job. If you're going to do science, you have to be passionate about it. You have to depend on your own confidence in doing the things that make you wake up in the morning and want to do it. Having a network is really important. Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, you have to get from yourself the sense of doing something that makes life worth living. And it's not ultimately, Jill, right? It's not your colleagues. It's you, and the belief that and perseverance and the understanding that you're doing this because it's what you're here for.
Yeah, you've got to be passionate, right?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
a passionate person can still get sidetracked and derailed.
I don't know how you don't get passionate about astronomy. I mean, how do you start looking? There's just nothing about it that isn't amazing and awe-inspiring. Even if you're just studying things that are supposedly boring, like brown dwarfs. I'm sorry, but I think brown dwarfs are boring. But even if I look at brown dwarfs, they are still amazing in and of themselves. If you think about, well, is it a planet? Is it a gas giant? Is it a star? What is it? We don't know. But it's still, even then, you can still get passionate about it. Astronomy is really lucky, I think, in that way, that it invokes a lot of passion in people. Svetlana, what about you? What advice?
Yes, I got advice when I entered university from our professors. The first lecture we got was like, what does it mean to be astronomer? And the first advice was, yeah, you love astronomy, fine, but to be a professional, to be successful, it's not just astronomy what you learn. You have to know physics as physicist, mathematics as mathematician, and computer science as computer science. So you have to be all these three. And now if you look for life, you have to be also biologist. These four together make you astrobiologist. And this is what we learn continuously. You have to be ready to make mistakes and learn and get over it and learn again.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of questions I want to get to before we have to end all of this. I personally want to have a hangout where all we do is we talk about, is science being handled? Are we the way in which we're doing science? Is there a better way to do it? And that's this whole model of, mentors and apprenticeship. And is there a better way? But that's a topic for another time. I'd love to have that conversation as well. So some questions. Condor Boss is asking, if life is found on Europa, or on one of the other ice moons of Mars, how would that impact SETI, Jill? If we find it somewhere else, what are you guys going to do? Close up shop?
Celebrate. No, of course not. We'll celebrate along with everyone else, and we'll know that if it happened independently twice in this one solar system,
right,
that life is in fact a cosmic imperative. And we'll just go, we'll have that much more ammunition as we try and move forward to build bigger and better facilities to look for biosignatures and technosignatures.
So you brought up a good point that I want to push you on a little bit more. You said if we find it elsewhere in our own solar system, 2 examples independent of life in our own solar system. I argue, and I've had in the past in this ExoLife Hangout, that that's a bad thing. We don't want to find life twice in the same solar system because of something that's it's been called the Great Filter. And if we find life elsewhere in our solar system, independent of Earth, and that means that the beginning of life, the starting of life, the genesis of life, if we find it twice in the same solar system, then life is pretty easy to do. And that means life is everywhere. And that's a bad thing, because the fact that we haven't seen life, intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, might mean that this great filter, whatever it is still ahead of us. We still have yet to face this. Do you know what I'm talking about? This idea of a great filter, and, you know, the reason, the Fermi's paradox, and the reason we don't see life everywhere is because of this. What do you think of that?
Well, you're not going to see it unless you look for it. And I'm very adamant that in terms of looking for intelligent life, using electromagnetic radiation as our tool, we have done the equivalent of dipping one 12-ounce glass into the Earth's oceans and looking inside that glass to see whether we've caught a fish, right? That experiment could in fact work. But if you did it and you found no fish in your glass, I don't think you're going to be arguing that some filter in our future prohibited fish in the ocean. I think you'll just say, well, damn, we've got to look harder, and we have to look more.
Fair enough. All right. And Jeff's made a similar point in the past. He's chastised me.
You know what I say to this, that we don't have the capability yet, and the fear that somehow life is so fragile that it blinks out, I balance with the understanding that life is incredibly robust. And if we wipe ourselves out, we're going to cheer for the rest of our ecology, which is more robust than Homo sapiens, because after all, upright ape-like creatures have existed for millions of years, and they just came and they went, and we're just the latest version of that. So I sympathize with the fear that life is fragile and it blinks out, but I take comfort in the fact that life is incredibly robust, and if we don't have the tools to look for it, then we can't really answer that question. And by the way, that's why now in time, through all of the tools that we have available to SETI, it's so important to make that search and to be able to statistically answer the question you want to ask, which is, could we have seen life if it was Earth-like or slightly more advanced than Earth-like in our corner of the galaxy?
Okay, well, that's related to a question from Cosmic Lettuce on Discord, who's asking, should astronomers be looking for actual signs of life, or just the conditions possible for life? At what point do biologists step in and astronomers step out? Now, I just want to say that Svetlana has had some good, and Jeff have both written some papers on how to find a lot of these conditions and even signs of life using various albedo measurements and things like that of planetary surfaces. So I think your answer is going to be both, but I'll let you actually answer. Should we be looking? I
disagree that astronomer has to step out. It's definitely a collaboration. That's why it's called astrobiology. And biologists themselves cannot find life, and astronomers without biologists cannot find life. So it must be a collaboration. And even when we find life, of course, first we look for maybe conditions, and then we find the life, and when we find it, then it's both astronomers and biologists will continue studying it, and that's what's exciting actually for both sides. And geologists, by the way, will join us as well, because then we will see so many details on planets that we can do exoplanetary geology, kind of, even though geo means Earth, but it will be like more planetology.
Yeah, I've been impressed by how incredibly difficult it's going to be to decide whether some observational effect is abiotic or biological. It really is not an open and shut case. Oh, I've found life.
I know. And even defining what life is isn't easy. I've yet to find someone be able to do
even
that.
Here on Earth, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a good question from J.B. Townsend. Is it probable and or possible to detect solar systems with higher numbers of planets? For example, 40 or 50 exoplanets in one system. 40 or 50? Can you get that many in a system?
Interesting, yeah.
Well, I think the most we have so far is 8, right? But we're we don't have an observational timeline that would have shown us planets farther out. And we've certainly seen systems that are stacked much more compactly than our solar system. Seven worlds the size of Earth, interior to the orbit of Mercury, is pretty amazing around a little star. So I suspect larger systems are possible.
Yeah, I've never thought of that.
Even
planets.
in the solar, 50, I don't know, but even in the solar system, we still look for and suspect larger planets beyond Neptune and Pluto orbits, and maybe they do exist. We just don't have yet possibility to detect them directly. And maybe not 50, but it depends. You see, we have this class of dwarf planets, which are kind of intermediate size, and I don't know about 50, but maybe 20, yes. Why not?
Okay, I'm going to ask Andrew Planet's question, even though I don't fully understand it. He's asking, Jill, would you say an objective intellect, is asexual, and that until the scientific community accepts that, there will be slow progress with women in science and astronomy having equal opportunities? An objective intellect, maybe he's saying that humans can't be objective.
No, that intellect is as a concept is asexual. That's what I understand.
Okay, all right. Well, okay. Go ahead, Svetlana. Do you have an answer?
Well, I would agree that intellect actually exists in animals too. So intellect has nothing to do with whether you're man or woman. We're humans, and we have certain amount of intellect, yes, for sure. And animals also have, and maybe a bit less or a little different one. And I think you cannot deny that. And definitely, equal opportunity means that we have to bring what we have. And I say that it's a humanity which has two parts. Yes, we are different in physiology a little bit, but by the way, interesting point of view. It's quite good that we spread over the world in this discussion, because once I read in Scientific American an article that women are not capable of mathematics, and which was make me kind of sad and also laughing, because I graduated from mathematical faculty at St. Petersburg University, and 95% of women in former Soviet Union countries, they are 95% of students in mathematical faculties are women. So, and all teachers.
When was that article written? When was that article written?
That's only a couple of years ago, maybe
really?
3 or 4. Yes,
and it said women can't do mathematics.
They're not capable of, because of the specific brain arrangements, they're not less capable of doing mathematics, And this is pretty amazing because, I tell you that in Soviet Union there was no cultural bias in this way, and all women went to study mathematics because that was a favorite subject of them. And all teachers of mathematics at school, they are women. All my mathematics teachers, they were women. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know plenty of women who can do circles around me in math. So.
Yeah, well, so science, as an intellectual pursuit, right, doesn't necessarily have any kind of gender, but every scientist that approaches a problem they're trying to solve will do so on the basis of their past experience. And the types of experience that scientists have may vary from one gender to another.
Do you think that in science we should wipe out all gender identifiers so that every decision, every review, every panel, every grant application, whatever, should completely remove anything that allows gender to be identified? Or do we need something like equal opportunity that we do related to race? in science?
I think it should be all anonymous in the sense of, because it was statistically shown that proposals which are written by women, and if it's known it's a woman, they actually systematically graded less. If the same proposal is reviewed without indication that it's a woman, it would get better grades. There are such studies showing this. I think what you say is not, it's true that if we eliminate that from the beginning, that it's not clear whether it's woman or man applying for a proposal or writing a paper, then this will be a real equal opportunity and not just nominal or stated.
Yeah, I think we've seen in the music profession where symphony orchestras and other bodies that are recruiting new musicians and do so in a blind way so that the gender or
Yes.
Ethnicity of the player is not known, they've found that is a very useful construct. And
Sorry, Tony, let me just one more question on the subject, which is that some would argue that, and you made the point, that in the United States there has been a bias against women being advanced into scientific careers, STEM careers, because of this old saw, which is women can't do that kind of abstract thinking, which is of course false, but it means that the women that are now at the point of, you could imagine, that are at the point of trying to make careers are at something of a disadvantage. And that if you wiped out all gender identifiers versus you made an attempt to build back the infrastructure that promotes women into the training programs that make science done by women more likely or more possible, that might be a better way. I don't know the answer, but it isn't obvious to me that wiping away all gender identifiers versus providing equal opportunities that promote and develop the infrastructure for women isn't a better thing.
Yeah, but I think by making it anonymous, like Svetlana's suggesting, does immediately get rid of a lot of biases just out of hand right away. You don't know who wrote that proposal.
But you got to go all the way back to schools that teach women that they can't do math, right? I mean, we built a system in many ways, unconsciously or consciously, in this country that makes biases to early learning of math and STEM sorts of subjects.
That's true.
I mean,
there is lots of culture involved. It's true. I'm in Germany now, and I can see also big differences. This is a very cultural thing. It's not really. I don't know if it's not. We agree that this is not a inability of women to do something intelligent. It's really cultural perception, which starts very early in life of women and men. When they grow up.
Yeah. So, but Jeff, we've been seeing now for, I think, a couple of decades, we've been operating on this, all things being equal, let's pick the woman because they have been disadvantaged in the past. And I don't think that doesn't seem to have built a more woman or diversity friendly environment in our workplaces.
Yeah, that's true. There are other things going on. On the other hand, the number of women that are doing engineering now compared to when you did engineering is enormously different, right?
Oh, yeah, but it's still small. I mean, it's not anything. Yeah, it is. It is more. And the thing I love about the exoplanets, it's a new field, right? It does not have. It's not all blocked up at the top by old white men, right? And so in both astrobiology and in the exoplanet studies, we're seeing all of these fabulous young women researchers with bright ideas and lots of dynamism and, persistent. And it's just really great to watch what a new field opening up can do in terms of diversity opportunities.
I wonder if that's going to be true with gravitational waves as well. That's another new science that's coming along, or another area of study. We're running late. Thank you guys for staying with me. There's a couple of quick questions, and then I'll let you go. This is from Abdul Qadir Almami, and wants to know about Ross 128b. Is there any updates or follow-ups on odd signals coming from Ross 128? Well,
that was a bit of science done poorly in the public. We've spent time, various groups have looked at it. We haven't seen anything. The initial detection is suspect. We have this thing called the Rio scale that we're trying to develop in the community, first introduced in 2000, now being revamped to make it more amenable to our kind of media, the way we do science in the media. And had we had that scale functioning when this report came out, it would have been given a very low marks on credibility.
What's the scale called again?
The Rio scale, actually Rio 2.0. It was first, the paper was first presented in Rio de Janeiro.
Oh,
in 2000.
Okay,
so,
I see.
Like the Torino scale for near-Earth objects.
And it's this life possibility index or something, or?
No, it just has two components. One is how significant is the purported discovery, and two, how credible is it? And 0 is a possible number on that scale, 0 to 10. And I think early on that Ross 128b would have gotten a low score.
Okay.
In other words, when somebody makes a claim, you can look at the Rio scale and decide whether or not you should pay attention.
Okay, sure.
So should we accept that every press release should come out with some kind of weighting factor of trust?
We're trying to do that.
I wish that would be true, because I've seen some pretty outrageous press releases. I'll tell you now.
I think,
okay. Well, Abdul Qadir's comment is following up with a comment, but we did discover an Earth-like exoplanet there, Ross 128b. So, anyway. So real quick, Achilles 308, SETI is not looking at gravitational waves. I'm just going to answer that real quick. They're looking using radio waves. Look up Allen Telescope Array, and it'll tell you what it's looking for. But this is a related question from Oldie 184, and this will be the last one. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but SETI is using radio waves to find life, right? What do you think? And assume that very, very advanced civilizations are still using radio waves to communicate. Why do you think and assume that they're still using radio waves?
Well, there's probably technology that we haven't yet invented that an advanced technology could be using. Radio waves, they travel pretty well through the interstellar medium without being absorbed or scattered. There's potentially a lot of uses for radio waves above and beyond what we've already done on this planet. It's a bit of physics that isn't going to change. And, perhaps they've got a museum of ancient instruments that they keep going just for the benefit of the emerging young technologies like us.
Okay. Well,
do
you want to comment?
I think they definitely use electromagnetic radiation. Which wavelength, that's hard to say, but probably radio waves are good because they do propagate pretty well.
And we should point out, SETI or the Allen Telescope Array is listening to millions, if not billions, of frequencies at once, right, Jill?
Yes, that's true.
But the question before that, which is, could we use gravitational radiation as a signal, is also really interesting, right? Now that we know that we can detect gravitational waves and the coherent.
Oh, come on, Jeff! What are they going to do? Bang two black holes together in like Morse code?
Some people think that quasars are evidence.
They will shake the space-time like this, and
like a big sheet.
Yes.
Never say never.
Okay, you're right. Okay,
yeah. Actually,
I shouldn't poo-poo.
You know how Nature has a one-page science fiction story at the back of every issue, The Futures? Yeah. There's a great story by Greg Benford on just that.
Okay. All right. Well, we will leave it there, folks. I want to thank Jill Tarter, Dr. Jill Tarter from the SETI. She's a former director of the SETI Institute. She's with us today. We're talking about a new book that she is the subject of called Making Contact, Jill Tarter and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. You can get the book on Amazon and other places. It's written by Sarah Scholes, and I'm looking forward to reading it myself. So thank you, Jill, so much for taking time out to talk to us. And Jeff and Svetlana, it's always been fun. I love having you guys. And Kevin, we're going to be back in 2 weeks, right?
We sure are.
Okay.
Yes.
So check in back in 2 weeks for the next ExoLife Hangout. I'm going to be on Tuesday, February 2nd at the Kennedy Space Center, where I will be looking at the Falcon Heavy launch. I spent my money and bought some tickets, and I'm going to be in the VIP section, and I'll try to live stream it while I'm there to look at the Falcon Heavy launch while Elon Musk sends his Tesla up into space. Billionaire.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Amazing time to be alive right now.
It is. Sure. Yeah, especially for a billionaire. You know, Elon, we got this elf here, right? And it's ExoLife Finder. And if you wanted to put some solar panels on,
you must tell him. You go there, so you must tell him this.
I will do. All right, guys. All right. Well, thank you all so much for watching. And I'm sorry about my cough. Thank you guys for bearing with it. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always,